It's a pleasure to have you. Been a huge fan of yours for a long time, and now our paths intersect through Nayaka, which is happening on May 31st in Austin.
Yeah, really excited to be here. My name is Vivek, Bharatanatyam dancer, as well as also trained in Mridangam and Konakul. I have learned from many fantastic teachers over my training. The first of which was Madhusri Seturaman in Dallas, Vidya Subramaniam in the Bay Area, and I'm now working with Dr. Apoorva Jayaraman as my current mentor. And on the Mridangam side, I've trained with Ramesh Srinivasan in the Bay Area and done a little bit of work with other Konakal artists afterwards.
Om Namah Shivaya, Shivaya Namah Shivaya, Shivaya Namah Om Namah Shivaya.
Yeah, I don't have any recollection of it, but I think to those around me, it was very much a bit of an instant spark in terms of relationship with dance. So the kind of nice kind of incubation of this whole thing was that my parents had moved to Dallas when I was about a year old, and down the street we had a family friend who was a dance teacher. And aside from kind of being the few Indians in the community, my sister and the dance teacher's daughter kind of ended up becoming fast friends. They would kind of hang out. My sister started learning dance. So I was getting babysat a lot of times by my first dance teacher, Mother Shanti, while they were like doing class and things like that, while my parents were at work. So I was at a very young age, I think, playing with the tattakari and pretending like I was conducting Adava classes and things like that. I mean, obviously, I don't have much recollection of it now, but there are some very fun videos of me attempting to do alaripus like very early on. So my dance teacher was very much like, before he starts doing crazy things and starts learning whatever he wants to learn, just like put him in classes. So I started with Madhushriyante when I was about 4, like on Vijay Dasmi, like started properly, and kind of have been running ever since. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think there was kind of like a natural up and down around when I was like in high school period, primarily because I started doing a lot more mridangam, number one, and number two, it was like a lot of, high school activities and things like that. So you kind of don't put as much focus on certain art forms. So at that point also, you have a young boy in a high school, and I was not super keen on maybe performing as much around that period. Obviously, there's many different reasons why. There's many different kind of like peer pressure, peer judgment, whatever, etc. kind of associations around dance at that period. So around high school, I was very hesitant about dance, and kind of it would come in waves here and there whenever my teacher had a show or something like that. I would kind of just like quietly disappear, do my show, and come back. And then in college, I think I was starting to try and figure out. So I went to a really fantastic college called Swarthmore College, which is a tiny liberal arts university in Pennsylvania. And one of the reasons I unintentionally ended up going there was because I wrote my college essay about being a male dancer. And it was one of those things that like I had not really processed the whole gender aspect, or like just the diaspora aspect of being an Indian American male dancer, etc., all of those things. And that was kind of my first attempt at thinking about these things when I was like applying to college. So I unintentionally ended up at a school where these types of conversations were consistent, and, ideas of explore your identity and be whoever you are, and extremely like liberal arts types of things were constantly on display. So that was a really like welcoming place to start exploring some of these things, like about being a dancer primarily, and kind of just like simple acceptance, resilience with those ideas kind of came in play. And right around my sophomore year is when Indian Raga came out, which was obviously like a very big part of my career and journey, which I think also kind of fundamentally changed my dance life going forward. Yeah. Indian Raga was like a fantastic experience. It's one of those like pivotal experiences that you don't forget, and kind of was one of those things that really changed my relationship with art like, moving forward. And I think fundamentally the biggest reason for that is because of the people that you're surrounded with, not necessarily because of, you know, making videos or getting X amount of views. What was really important was, I think around that period, specifically with Indian Americans in the arts, in the diaspora, etc., when they would go to college, you often don't get much experience getting to be a part of these Indian art communities as much. Now there exist a lot of college teams and things like that, you know, a cappella groups, etc., that, you know, kind of are focused on this. Not that I went to college like 10,000 years ago, but like I went to a tiny liberal arts school where there was not really many other people that were interested in these things. So I was not really around people that were, or I did not really have a community surrounding, you know, any of the arts. So when I started Indian Raga, the first Zoom call I got on, I remember there was 4 of us who were dancers that were all around the same age. We started immediately talking about the things we've always wanted to do, but never got the chance to do. Not because like no one stopped us, but because we were like, I've been, you know, just learning. I've always wanted to do Nandichol. You know, that was something that like all 4 of us were like, oh my God, that's so weird. I didn't realize everyone wanted to do that. So then getting the opportunity and basically a tiny platform at the time, which was like, I think they were, Raga as a platform was around like a couple 10,000 views, things like that, you know, prior to this. So we were like going in with no pressure, kind of just like, oh, we're going to do cool choreography and we're going to do whatever we want. And on the side, there was a whole aspect of like music that was starting, where I got to start creating tracks and kind of working with many different talented musicians like Mahesh Raghavan, Sushmita, Vinod, who are all, you know, fantastic artists in their own right. I got to start working with them as well. And I was not really like decided on whether I was a musician or a dancer at that time. So it was a very fantastic space to be in, because I got to do everything. I literally got to put whatever I wanted to try. And I'm pretty sure I played like the djembe in a track at some point. I did Konakol on a cappella. I mean, there's a lot of cringy things that you look back on and you're like, dear God, why did I do that? But even the dance, you know, but it was such a welcoming, like, you know, kind of an explosion of creative energy. And I was very, very like creatively inert before that. Like I was not really doing anything on my own at that point. So, and just opening up that avenue was something where I suddenly got the idea or like the feeling that maybe there was more to this whole world for me, which I hadn't really explored to that point. So that kind of was the next step. I think there's kind of waves, to be honest. Like I think it's really funny that I ended up in that position, because I kind of have ended up in that position in multiple other places in my life. Like, for example, I also work in, like, you know, I'm just finishing my PhD in computational biology, which is the intersection of computer science and biology. And when people ask me, are you a computer scientist or a biologist? You kind of go, I don't know. That's kind of what it's like. I will say, I think being a dancer right now, the amount of skills that I rely on from having trained in music is very, very high. So it's not like my musical knowledge has ever left me. Am I still playing kachiris as much? Probably not. But, you know, there was a period, I think, post-COVID, or not post-COVID, but around like 2022-ish, I was very much like, okay, it's been a second, let me play a ton. So I played a lot of kacheris, I played a lot of arangetrams, and I very much realized I was like, I don't think this is actually giving me what I wanted to do, which is at that time, unintentionally, I was very much like, I want to figure out what on earth I want to do with dance. So that's kind of where we've ended up today. Good question. I would say not as much now. It's interesting because like I think what we were doing then was also very much a response to what was occurring at the time, which was like a very much like in almost some sense like a literal fusion of cultures. Like we were trying to get American pop music to sound Indian. We were trying to get an Indian track to sound Western. Like we were very much like within that mindscape of how do these things can go together? How can they all kind of move together and create something interesting? You're also dealing with a YouTube algorithm that was promoting very short, highly kind of explosive content at the time, not compared to like long form content, which is doing better now. So we were very much like curtailed at like 5-6 minutes, like try and create something within that time. And so it's very interesting. So like the same rules of what we would apply in Bharatanatyam was not constantly working on the, what do you call YouTube? Not the silver screen, but whatever, I don't know. Whatever YouTube is. Like, for example, symmetry was not always valuable because people would lose interest within 10 seconds. So like how do you maintain viewership and how do you maintain people interested in whatever you were doing? I think it's a really complicated topic, but all I can say is that when I was approaching it from a musical lens, it was very different than when I was approaching it from a dance lens. So the music was always fun because I was like, oh, how can I put an alaripu on top of what sounds like a kind of, we were kind of actually taking a lot of inspiration from like, there are certain like tracks that are like Egyptian and Arabic that had these like really interesting like beats that we were actually pulling from. So that is kind of where EDM Alaripu started and ended up, and then we ended up with something that sounds like whatever it is now. But it was just starting as, oh, I like dictionary, what kind of exists in other like interesting pop right now. So that kind of was where that started. Dance, I have no clue, to be honest. I don't pretend to know what the future is of fusion or what the future is and what is Bharatanatyam and what is not. Nor do I really think that I can or should be the only one to speak on that. But at the time, we were very much like, let's run with it and we'll figure it out as we go. I don't know today if I would do the same things or make the same choices, but I am here today. And I do think there is a lot of value in understanding movement outside of your own tradition or your own like dance style. And whether that means you need to be doing, I don't know, some set of fusion, or whether you're incorporating the way in which you consider the way your movement quality works or the way that you use your muscles in a specific way, I don't know. But I also don't pretend to be making those decisions right now because I let someone else choreograph their thoughts on me, so I kind of allow it to occur. Yeah, 100%. The energy is different.
Yeah.
For me, it's like it's funny though, because like I will say I think there's a little bit of like a romanticization of the live music experience in some senses, because like if I think back on some of those performances, I probably blacked out for most of them. You know, like I'm not actively sitting there and being like, aha, or like, you know, looking at them consistently, you know, like that's kind of not there to a certain extent. But there are some of those experiences where I think for me, more than anything, it's like the rehearsal process that is so special. Like just being able to work with musicians, being able to create an experience in that moment, like that process is really just so awesome. Like more than the performance videos, I often like, I'm like, if I have rehearsal videos, I think those are way more special to me. So there are certain performances that I look back on and I just have a lot of joy on because of the people I was working with and the experience I had behind the scenes doing it. And like, yes, the music can be fantastic, but like, I think those are the things that I take home at the end of the day. Like, but it's one of those things that with a live music, live performance experience can really only be experienced live. So like a video of it will never quite ever encapsulate the experience of it. And also many times if I look back on my live music performances, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why did I do that? Like, why? Like, I think I'm having such a good time, and I think I'm like bawling out or something like that, and I'm like, I don't know about that. Like, pull it back, or like, there's so many different ways you can interpret your own response to something like that experience of live music. But yeah.
Ni sa ni sa ni sa da ni sa ni da pa ma ga ma ni ga ma pa da ni sa ni da pa ma ga ni ga ma pa da ni pa.
Yeah, probably. It's hard to draw on like a single example, I would say, like right now. But I think the biggest thing is very often it's those subtle things of like, for example, when I watch a dancer and I can see they're exactly on the speed and the beat that the musicians are on, right? That's a very small, subtle thing. And it's a thing that a lot of people don't necessarily need to know or like need to have to be a quote unquote good dancer. But it's one of those things that I have innately observed and I think I unintentionally do no matter what. Like it's like those subtle things that I think will always be there because I think also like having been a musician on a dancer's orchestra, I take I try to be very careful in how you communicate with an orchestra because it's a lot of work what they're doing. And I think one of the main reasons I ever fell in love with dance actually was because of dance music. So, and dance music is just fundamentally, for me, just one of the most like best, is like the best part of it. Like I often just listen to my dance tracks without needing to be dancing to them. And like I have learned from my current mentor what it is to actually work on the dance, which is a whole other conversation. But from the musical perspective, I think I will always be an appreciator of the music more than anything else. So oftentimes like, the last couple of years, I've had the privilege of being able to work with live orchestras in India. And my first rehearsal has always been me just kind of being like, oh, wow, that's what it sounds like, And then I'll finish the rehearsal and then I'm like, okay, yeah, I need to actually pull it together for the next rehearsal and not just be doing whatever I want. And I think the very first year I was a lot more like, I was trying to figure out how to kind of like, maybe unintentionally try to control certain things and like try and figure out how a jati was ending and try and make sure because mridangam like that's how I think. But I've slowly I think started to allow that to exist however it exists and kind of let off the reins in some cases and learn when to put on the reins. I think some of those things are kind of the learnings when you're coming from a musical perspective to the dance visualization and a presentation of kind of a complete picture rather than necessarily just good music and good dance, I guess. I don't know. I mean, 100%. I think it's one of those things that like a mridangist or like, a violinist will always hear the violin, like they'll be like, oh, did you hear that thing that the violin did? And then like another person who's maybe a musician might be like, I didn't hear that, but did you hear what the singer did? Like, so as a mridangist, I will always hear the mridangam. There's nothing I can do about that. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing because sometimes I'm sitting there focusing on the aditi and trying to be like, oh, how's it ending? Very subconsciously, but I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing on my physical form, which is the point of dancing sometimes. So I think it's very subconscious, but like I will never be able to not listen to an aditi because like, I can't not. but I think like this last year was the first year I kind of got to explore creating some of the musical structure behind a piece that I did. And that was just like incredibly fun to figure out with musicians because we had flexibility. And so there were jettis that I composed, which I got the joy of being able to watch someone else interpret them. That I think is so cool. Like when you get to be able to create something, but then kind of let go of it and see how someone else interprets it, that is fantastic. Like especially on a Nattavangam artist, I love the way people kind of can create their own persona out of the way they recite something. And then a mridangam will always be just something I can always like listen to. Like it doesn't matter. 100%. I do think there's like I think there's a kind of natural connotation, especially as musicians, that you tend to feel with ragams for sure. And I actually I don't know if you like there's like a particular concept in psychology called like synesthesia where like people can associate things with colors. So like I remember seeing this on Instagram, like there was someone I know who was like Vasanta is purple. And I was like, it's orange. I was like, it's orange. I swear to God, it is orange. And I texted my friend who's a violinist and I was like, it's orange, right? And she was like, no, it's purple. And I was like, ah. But I don't know, like there are these funny things that you kind of build up in your brain about the way you expect or associate a ragam. And there was a piece I worked on a couple of years ago that was like very simple Viritam as like a piece where it's the different perspectives of individuals watching Krishna as he enters the auditorium to fight Kamsa. And it was just built very simply, you know, like a kamboji for like Viram and kapi for some, you know, vatsalyam for compassion and things like that. And I was working with a friend who was kind of singing this to kind of work with me. And she was like, oh, like I know Atana is always like given a certain positive vibe, but in this one they had done Atana for like Raudram, I think. And I was like, that kind of feels weird to me. But I kind of get it because I've seen Atana and Raudram in other places also, but like it just didn't make sense to me at first. But I think what also equally matters as the ragam is how it's sung or how it's interpreted, right? Like that I think can be so interesting. Like I used to not really like Shankarabharanam, and now I really like it. I don't really know why. Like, and I think I used to think of it as very positive, but now it's in some of these Vadnams, it's so romantic. Like, I don't know, there's so many different ways you can consider a ragam. So I think it's really interesting because like I think as most dancers and musicians, like we love Charukesi or like love Charukesi Varnam just because it's so emotional. But I think it's so interesting and in fact such an interesting challenge to be able to be like, how do you make Todi sound cool or like fun or like, you know, like aside from just loving the ragam as it is as a musician, like how can you interpret something in a way that can be both interesting visually and musically? I think that could be really cool. So from that sense, working on Surti as a Varnam was a huge challenge because Surti is such a difficult ragam on its own and is one of those like classic traditional ragams that's built by phrases. So when a ragam is often built by phrases, you kind of get repetition of that phrase over a while, like over the course of the Varnam. Like, so how do you make that visually interesting? How do you not make it sound monotonous? How do you find your own like grandiose or romance or like whatever within the ragam? I think is so interesting. But that's a collaboration with the musicians at the end of the day.
Mita, Jornuta, ta, dimita, Jornuta, dimita, Genta, ta, ding, Gennata, ding, Gennata, ta, ding, Gennata, ding, Gennata, ta, ding, Gennata.
Being a Nattavanaar is like the highest set of responsibility that you can take on. Like you are in control, and it's one of those things like it's a very subtle set of like communications, you know, because like people like to say like a conductor, but you're not exactly like a conductor, but you're also kind of a conductor. but I think you're really just like attempting to be the conduit or like the conversation between the dancer and the orchestra. I will say, like with Kritya, I think the perk of the fact that many of us have been working together with Yamini alongside all of us for a long time is we all kind of take responsibility in that fact. So there will be things fundamentally that I will miss that Harsha, who's playing Mridangam, will get. And there will be things that if I miss them, Rohit is singing and he has been singing for her even longer than I have been there, that he will know. And there will be things that, you know, Laya on the violin will always know because that is her cue. So I think that's the fundamental difference of working with like an ensemble that is all there to take responsibility for what they're doing. I think it's a different case when you're say in season when everyone is like, this is my role and this is what I do because I have 50 concerts I'm playing. So like, you know, I take on each aspect of what I can take on. And then there, the Nattavangam becomes very important, right? Because there you have to be able to say like, you know, no, stop, or like, oh, actually, like, you know, the speed is wrong. Like we need to change it. We need to adjust. Like all of that is, it is a humongous responsibility. But I think as a dancer and then as a mridangist, it's one of those things that I kind of intuitively tend to take on. Like I unintentionally will probably learn the choreography no matter what I do. Sometimes I need to stop myself from doing that because I'm like, I don't need that. But it's a big responsibility, but you have to take it, and if you're choosing to do it, and you have to lead without being overbearing and kind of understanding the social norms of the orchestra, and you also have to you know, like people want to get really excited and have a lot of fun, but you also have to stay in control because if you are off, everyone kind of can do whatever they want. And sometimes it can work and sometimes it can't work. So yeah, I mean 100%. I will say like Raga was my first experience doing it. So that experience will always remain a little bit distinct. And it was also like, it was one of those things where you have a week and you just create as much as possible, right? Like, I don't think anything will ever be able to like live up to that set of experiences surrounding that particular week, right? And we did that twice. And even the second time we did it was different, right? So that first week, the first set of people, the first set of kind of implosions and connections will always be very distinct. I mean, because I'm also still working with two of them, like to this point in my life, which has been almost 10 years of working together as dancers. That's a creative collaboration that like is like sealed as, you know, as like nothing else in the way that I approach dance. With Kritya, it came at a later point in my career, right? But it was kind of my first time taking on responsibility as a Nattavanar consistently. So that I think was the place where I learned a lot about what it meant to take responsibility for my role in this side of the orchestra. And really also, I think that was where I learned to kind of let go of creative control, which is the sense that sometimes Yamini comes with a very specific vision in her mind, right? And even if I believe the music should be considered in a slightly different way, that is the conversation that you do as an ensemble, right? So if a jati is given to me, I need to learn how to recite it the way that it was given to me. So that I think is one of those things that is a important and like was a very real and necessary part of the learning in terms of being a part of an ensemble, was realizing that you're not the center of attention and you need to, like, you know, you do your role and you also work with what's given with you and then you add to it from what you can add. But there's also something incredibly special about working with the same set of people over years, right? Like, I think it's a privilege, which is kudos to Yamini for doing it more than anyone else. But it is a privilege that as a dancer, we don't normally get now, right? Like there was a period where the Malavikas and the Pridarshaniyas were able to tour with the same set of artists. And the way that those artists knew the ins and out of every piece and every kind of muscle tense that the performer was going through is something different, you know? And today, after a couple of years of working together, I think I can see where that value starts showing up. Of course, I wish that I had that, for myself as a dancer, but I'm also willing to respect that, it's really nice at this point in my career to also be able to work with multiple sets of people and explore that as well. So there's value in so many different approaches, but I think the relationship that I've managed to start having with Hajran Mridangam, Yamini who's dancing, Laya, Rohit, etc., has been like really fantastic. Yeah.
ಎಂತ ಚಲುವಗೆ ಮಗಳನು ಕೊಟ್ಟನು ಗಿರಿರಾಜನು ನೋಡಂ
100%. I mean, I think the first figure that was like explosion was Valli, because like there were some of those performances early, like when I was living in Dallas as a kid. I mean, to be honest, I don't really remember them now, like because I was so young. But those are the things that like even my parents will talk about now, The first concert I remember, of course, other than my teachers, like Mother Shri Aunty was a huge inspiration, of course. The first concert I remember to this day was Priya Aunty's in the Bay Area. And I don't remember much of what she did, but I remember she did Nadamadi Tirinde, like a Nindastuti. And I remember laughing for the first time in a Bharatanatyam show. That was something that I was like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Like it felt very like an austere thing. And I was like, oh, I didn't know we laughed. To the point that like people were like clapping and standing at the end of just this padam, which was like, all right, okay. Like I didn't know we did that. And then afterwards she was like, okay, this audience likes humor. So she did the Paras Chavali right after that, because she was like, I guess they love humor, so she went for that. And I remember being like, oh my God, this is so funny too. And I think that was my first experience realizing like the sheer power of Abhinaya. And as a kid, and like as a kid who liked rhythm, I was always like, nrita, but that was like one of those experiences that you cannot forget. There have been, of course, like more recent people that I've watched in the last couple of years that have just been like incredible. But I think that particular show is one of those things that I can, you can kind of see like a blurry mind's vision of it. That is kind of what I can see. And of course, there were many performances of Vidyanti, like as I was older in high school. I got to play Nattuvangam for her a couple of times, and that was like my start into Nattuvangam. She trained me. And those were, again, another set of examples of just like, oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, it's been awesome. Yeah, no, I think like when I started working with Apoorva Akka, I've told her this, and I tell most people this, that like when I was starting, like when I was right around that period, I was actually very like in this mental space where I was like, it had been maybe a couple of years since Raga, and I was very much like, I need to figure out what I'm doing with dance. But I was very much like, I need to figure it out myself. So I was like going to the studio a couple times a week and being like, how am I dancing? Like very much like in the mirror, being like, what am I doing? What is this? How does this look? Taking a lot of videos. I was like in that place. And I was very much like, I don't necessarily want to learn right now, was where I was at that period. And I had like a kind of serendipitous situation where there was a weekend where I was supposed to be working, and Apoorva Akka was in Boston doing a one-day workshop. And it was literally the street across from me. And the night before, I found out I didn't have to work. And I was like, I think I should go. I was like, yeah, sure. Okay, why not? Like I had seen the videos on YouTube. I was like, I knew she was fantastic. But I didn't know, if she taught. I didn't know how she taught, anything like that. I went to the workshop and I was just like blown away. And I think what is clear, what I'd like to emphasize here was like, I wasn't ever looking to learn with her because of how fantastic she is as a performer. I knew that. I had no like qualms about that, and I knew she was fantastic as a performer. But what I saw in the workshop was how she taught. And there was very specific things. Like I remember for the first time, she was like, when you're just pulling your arm in like this, like, what are you pulling against? She was like, resist something. And I was like, what do you mean resist something? And then so she was like, I mean, of course there was like 25 people, so like I wasn't sitting there talking with her personally, but she made us all have someone hold someone else's arm and then pull away from that to get an idea of what are you trying to activate when you're just doing a movement like that in a pakkarava, right? Like, what does that even mean? So that was the first time when I was like thinking about movement in a way that wasn't music or interpreting music or looking like the way my teachers did it. That was kind of what drove me to be like, oh, this person has an entirely different perspective that I have never considered before. And I have thought that multiple times over my period of learning and working with her, which has been, I guess now I'm hitting like 6 years, which is awesome. But there's so much more to learn. It's just been fantastic. Yeah, it's been a fantastic experience with her. Yeah.
ಸ್ಮಶಾನವು ನೋಡೆ ಗಜ ಚರ್ಮಾಂಬರವಂ ಮನೆಯಂಬುವುದು.
I think the whole concept of like independence is really interesting. I think it's like it's very much also like, I think there's a deep cultural clash that like is interesting to figure out as like kids raised in the West and kids raised, you know, not in the West, and like that whole experience of trying to figure out like this cultural clash between like what is right, what is wrong in terms of Bharatanatyam training. What I think has been kind of occurring for me is in the first year, I very much was trying to like just learn. And as I started performing with her, like under her guidance, I mean, the very first year, there was a lot of it that I realized I was like, I'm just unintentionally copying. And not even just copying, I think like taking on light mannerisms and light kind of things that you don't really realize you're consciously doing. And I think at that point, I was still trying like kind of internally a little bit to fight for independence, I think. There was some aspect of me that was a little bit like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this. I'm going to see if I like this or do it this way and whatever. But that was also my first year performing in India. So I cut myself some slack to figure out what on earth I was doing. But I think what that taught me and kind of what consistent conversations with Apoorva Akka, debriefing all of these different things and going through over the next couple of years was I think learning to like fully put my trust and fully put whatever I'm doing, the trust of what I'm doing with her. And that was very hard for me to do, to be perfectly honest. And she knows this and we've chatted about it, but like, it's a long-term relationship to realize that like someone you're working with is fundamentally interested in molding you and seeing what you're going to look like 10 years from now. That's not a concept I had ever considered before working with someone like her. You know, like there are things she can see in me that I think have only started to show up now, which she was probably seeing when I started working with her 6 years ago, right? And there are so many more things that have yet to be addressed and yet to be figured out that she has probably seen and she's probably figured out, and she started thinking about for me, right? So it took for us almost 2 years, 2 seasons, right, of performing to really figure out and hone what it was I needed to be working on, what it is I need to be consistently having a conversation with her about, and what it is kind of she sees upon me and how she guides me and how she choreographs for me, etc. So I think there was, I don't know. Right now I'm very much in the place where I'm like, I will go where you tell me you want me to go. Because And I think that's really difficult for a lot of people, and I fully understand that's not the position that most people are in. But the ability to kind of be able to let go and be like, all right, I trust your judgment, I think is very, I hate to use the word empowering, but like, I think it's really powerful because in the arts, I think we're very often like kind of like forced to be like, I'm going this way or I'm going that way, or like, I'm going to try something always new. In this case, I have the ability to try something new, figure it out, show her, get her thoughts, have a discussion about it, see whether we like it or not, and then fundamentally discuss if I believe that, or if we both believe that something is working, right? Like, I think that is a creative collaboration that is rare and takes also, I think, a teacher that's very open-minded and very willing to have those discussions as well. Because, it's hard. We're also dealing with the cultural issue of like the way certain Indian arts are kind of expected to be seen in terms of teacher-student relationships. But I don't know. I work the way that I work, and I speak to her the way that I speak to her, and I sometimes ask things too casually, and I'm like, all right. But I think having that trust in a teacher has been such a like huge learning, like a really valuable learning for me at this point, in wherever I am and wherever I will continue to go. Like, all I can say is that whatever success has been happening over the last couple of years, I know personally where that's coming from. And I know how much I can attribute it to the combination of her and of me, and of which parts are moving and which parts are kind of pushing that wheel forward. So that is, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know if that's exactly like kind of the independence or kind of exploration idea that like most people consider when thinking about working with a teacher or an artist or a mentor. But I think just understanding what it meant to build up a foundation, upon which you can do whatever you want, that is something that I think is often a little bit harder for us in this country, because we just don't often tend to work that way. Like, we don't build as much before we start exploring. And I think that's kind of been a real learning for me. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the really fun thing about this collaboration is all three of us all work with Apoorva Akka, of course, as like solo artists, right? So that's been really fun because all three of us can kind of also see the way where our graphs are all going in very interesting but sometimes different directions, which is, I think, really cool. In terms of group choreography, like, we started with just like failing a lot, I would say, to be perfectly honest. Like, and not like failing like a couple of casual times, like, you fail a couple years in a row kind of a thing. Not to say that we've made it by any means, but I think we've learned what things didn't work for us and what things did work for us. What was very interesting is kind of at the beginning of the three of us working together, what was really working was how we all did nritta. We all kind of had the same rhythm sense. We would all kind of really standardize the way that we were dancing. So we would all do these really interesting jatis, and there were group vadnams that we did where the jatis were always really interesting. What was not working was whatever stories we were trying to tell. And I think at that point we were very much trying to build margams, and we were trying to build within the traditional structure, and we didn't really have much other context to figure out what was happening. And then I think over COVID, things started changing for us, because we started looking at what we were doing, being like, this is not working, this is not working, this is not working. What are the specific things in what we were doing that is working? And kind of a really consistent comment that we got was, I love your camaraderie on stage. And that was such an interesting idea, because like, I had never talked or thought about camaraderie as a group aspect before this comment started showing up. And it doesn't mean that like we're just sitting there like fist bumping on stage. Like, it means that there's some kind of eclectic energy that's happening. There's some kind of sets of interactions that are moving between people, and like eye contact or smiles or slight body language. Those were the things that were starting to work. So we took a look at that and we were like, how can we build from that? So then we started building on characters that we found interesting, characters that had interpersonal relationships, amongst the three of us, we tend to have a very kind of familial sibling-y rivalry. So we kind of started building upon that. We started saying, what are the ideas that are interesting to both the Western and an Eastern audience? Like, not that you always need to consider audience when you're, building an idea, but we were very much like, what are ideas that are valuable? And we started sitting on family. We started being like family, family, family. How do we build on that? How do we build on that? And then we kind of ended up with three villains that we thought were interesting. And then we moved from there and moved from there and moved from there. And now it exists in its current iteration. And then we're hoping to do a lot more. I don't know. Yeah, but there's a lot of processing that occurs. Yeah.
I think we'll wrap up there.
Sounds good.
Yeah, but this has been wonderful.
Yeah.
I've learned so much.
And thank you again for having us, and thank you for putting this on, of course. But like I'm also equally so excited to be watching Shashank and Praveen over the weekend. So I think it'll be a really fun event. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank
we'll
you
we'll
again.
talk.
All right. Bye.
Bye.